My bad. Okay. Where's TikTok? There's TikTok. Boom. And boom. Vector! I'm committing crimes with direction and magnitude. Oh yeah! It's a classic. Alright, let me at the Discord and we should be ready to start this journey. I've never read this book before. They gifted it for my birthday. I got the trilogy. So that freaking Vector, that is such a classic. I freaking love that dude. Okay, live with reading stream. Alright, we're doing a reading part, and then we'll do something else after that. I won't tell you what we're doing until after we're done. But the timer is for the reading portion of it. Yes, sir. Alright, nobody mess up! Do not mess with my reading. I struggle enough as is. Alright, so ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't heard me, we're reading the Brandon Sanderson Mistborn. I just popped my arm. That was lovely. Oh, there's like pictures and stuff. Oh, there's quite a few books. Jeez. There's like 1, 2... Okay, so it's not a trilogy. It is at least 5 books. At least. Okay. I'm gonna read every note. If you purchase this book without a cover, you should be aware that this book is stolen property. It does indeed have a cover, so we're good there. We can breathe another day. Okay, are you ready? All right. Preface. Be strong, son. Sometime around 2001, I wrote those words. Wait. I don't think I need to read that. Do I need to read that? I don't think I need to read that. Never mind. Ignore that. Screw that. Screw being strong. Oh, they have some very detailed maps. Okay. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Alright, now the juice. We're getting to the juicy stuff. Sometimes I worry that I'm not the hero everyone thinks I am. The philosophers assure me that this is the time, that the signs have been met, but I still wonder if they have the wrong man. I'm not a man. So many people depend on me. They say I will hold the future of the entire world on my arms. What would they think if they knew that their champion, the hero of ages, their savior, doubted himself? Perhaps they wouldn't be shocked at all. In a way, this is what worries me most. Maybe in their hearts they wonder, just as I do. When they see me, do they see a liar? Tea. Alright, this is the prologue. Ash fell from the sky. Lord Tresting frowned, glancing up at the ruddy midday sky as his servant scuttled forward, opening a parasol over Tresting and his distinguished guest. Ashfalls weren't that uncommon in the Final Empire, but Tresting had hoped to avoid getting soot stains on his fine new suit coat and red vest, which had just arrived via canal boat from Luthadel. Fortunately, there wasn't much wind. The parasol would likely be effective. Okay. I am reading a book! I cannot read chat! How can I read a book and read chat at the same time? That just, like, doesn't happen. Dagnabbit. Tresting stood with his guest on a small hilltop patio that overlooked the fields. Hundreds of people in brown smocks worked in the falling ash, caring for the crops. There was a sluggishness to their efforts, but of course this was the way of the Ska. The peasants were an indolent and unproductive lot. They didn't complain. They knew better than most. Instead, they simply worked with bowed heads, moving around their work with quiet apathy. The passing whip of a taskmaster would force them into a dedicated motion for a few moments, but as soon as the taskmaster moved on, they would return to their languor. Fancy. Okay. Tresting turned to the man standing beside him on the hill. One would think, Trusting noted, that 1,000 years of working in fields would have bred them to be a little more effective at it. The obligator did I pronounce that right? Turned, raising an eyebrow, the motion done as if to highlight his most distinctive feature, the intricate tattoos that laced the skin around his eyes. The tattoos were enormous, reaching all the way across his brow and up the sides of his nose. There was a full prelan, a very important obligator? Indeed, Trusting had his own personal obligators back at the manor, but they were only minor functionaries with barely a few marks around their eyes. The man had arrived from Luthadel with the same canal boat that had brought Trusting's new suit. You should see City Ska Trusting, the obligator. Okay, am I pronouncing that right? That just doesn't seem right. It's okay. I just feel like it's slightly off. Obligator? That word's frequent. Obligator. Hold on, let me make sure.
Obligatory.
Frick! Wait, no! I was right! Okay, we're good. That was Tori, not Tor. We're good. Okay, you should see City Ska Trusting, the obligator said, turning back to watch the Ska workers. These are actually quite diligent compared to those inside Luthadel. You have more direct control over your Ska here. How many would you say you lose a month? Oh, a half dozen or so, Trusting said. Some to beating, some to exhaustion. Runaways? Never, Trusting said. When I first inherited this land from my father, I had a few runaways, but I executed their families. The rest quickly lost heart. I've never understood men who have trouble with their Ska. I find the creatures easy to control, if you show a properly firm hand. The obligator nodded, standing quietly in his gray robes. He seemed pleased, which was a good thing. The Ska weren't actually Trusting's property. Like all Ska, they belonged to the Lord Ruler. Trusting only leased the workers from his god, much in the same way he paid for the services of his obligators. The obligator looked down, checking his pocket watch, then glanced up at the sun. Despite the ashfall, the sun was bright this day, shining a brilliant crimson red behind the smoky blackness of the upper sky. Trusting removed a handkerchief and wiped his brow, thankful for the parasol's shade against the midday heat. Yo, Jackie, thank you for the share. Hello. Okay, she's already half task? Definitely not even normal or mold. Like, yeah, guys, it's okay. It is okay. Okay. Very well, Trusting, the obligator said. I will carry your proposal to Lord Venture as requested. He will have a favorable report for me on your operations here. Trusting held in a sigh of relief. An obligator, dang it, was required to witness any contract or business deal between noblemen. True, even a lowly obligator like the ones Trusting had engaged could serve as such a witness, but it meant so much more to impress Straff, Venture's own obligator. The obligator turned toward him. I will leave down the canal this afternoon. So soon, Trusting asked. Wouldn't you care to stay for some supper? No, the obligator replied. Though there is another matter I wish to discuss with you. I came not only at the behest of Lord Venture, but to look in on some matters for the Canton of Inquisition. Rumors say that you like to dally with your Ska woman. Ooh. Dallying. That's not good. Trusting felt a chill. The obligator smiled. He likely meant it to be disarming, but Trusting only found it eerie. Don't worry yourself, Trusting, the obligator said. If there had been any real worries about your actions, a Steel Inquisitor would have been sent here in my place. Trusting nodded slowly. Inquisitor. He'd never seen one of those inhumane creatures, but he had heard stories. I've been satisfied regarding your actions with your Ska women, the obligator said. Looking back over the fields, what I've seen and heard here indicates that you always clean up your messes. A man such as you, efficient, productive, could go far in Luthadel. A few more years of work, some inspired mercantile deals, and who knows? The obligator turned away, and Trusting found himself smiling. It wasn't a promise or even an endorsement. For the most part, obligators were more bureaucrats and witnesses than they were priests. But to hear much praise from one of the Lord Ruler's own servants, Trusting knew that some nobility regarded the obligators as unsettling. Some even considered them a bother. But at the moment, Trusting could have kissed his distinguished guest. Ooh, scandalous. Trusting turned back toward the Ska, who worked quietly beneath the bloody sun and the lazy flakes of ash. Trusting had been a country nobleman living on his plantation, dreaming of perhaps moving into Luthadel itself. He had heard of the balls and the parties and the glamour and the intrigue, and it excited him to no end. I will have to celebrate tonight, he thought. There was the young girl in the 14th hovel that he'd been watching for some time. Oh dear. He smiled again. A few more years of work, the obligator had said, but could Trusting perhaps speed that up if he worked a little harder? His Ska population had been growing lately. Perhaps if he pushed them a bit more, he could bring it in the entire harvest. I'm sorry, what? Bring in an extra harvest this summer and fulfill his contract with Lord Venture in extra measure. How do we get you to restart the book? I don't know. I don't know. We're a decent amount in already. Okay. Good evening, Juicy. Okay. See, this is the problem. I gotta not read chat. I keep getting distracted. Okay. Trusting nodded as he watched the crowd of lazy Ska, some working with their hoes, others on hands and knees, pushing the ash away from the fledgling crops. They didn't complain. They didn't hope. They barely dared think. That was the way it should be, for they were Ska. They were... Trusting froze as one of the Ska looked up. The man met Trusting's eyes, a spark, no, a fire of defiance showing in his expression. Trusting had never seen anything like it, not in the face of a Ska. Trusting stepped backward reflexively, a chill running through him as the strange, straight-backed Ska held his eyes, and smiled. Trusting looked away. "Curtain!" he snapped. The burly taskmaster rushed up to incline. "Yes, my lord." Trusting turned, pointing at... He frowned. Where had that Ska been standing? Working with their heads bowed, bodies stained by soot and sweat, they were so hard to tell apart. Trusting paused, searching, but he thought he knew the place. An empty spot, where nobody now stood. But no, that couldn't be it. The man couldn't have been disappearing from the group so quickly. Where would he have gone? He must have been there somewhere, working with his head now properly bowed. Still, his moment of apparent defiance was inexcusable. "My lord?" Curtin asked again. The obligator stood at the side, watching curiously. It would not be wise to let the man know that one of the Ska had acted so brazenly. "Work the Ska in that southern section a little harder," Trusting ordered, pointing. "I see them being sluggish, even for Ska. Beat a few of them." Oh, that's nice. Curtin shrugged but nodded. It wasn't much of a reason for a beating, but then he didn't need much of a reason to give the workers a beating. Okay, they were, after all, only Ska. This is very nice. Dang. Okay, Ghost. Fight a shot. 5 gifted subs to restart. No. That's up to Strom if he wants to make me restart. Kelsier had heard... Oh my gosh, I can't read. Kelsier had heard stories. He had heard whispers of times when once, long ago, the sun had not been red. Times when the sky hadn't been clogged by smoke and ash, when plants hadn't struggled to grow, and when Ska hadn't been slaves. Times before the Lord Ruler. However, those days were nearly forgotten. Even the legends were growing vague. Kelsier watched the sun, his eyes following the giant red disk as it crept toward the western horizon. He stood quietly for a long moment, alone in the empty fields. The day's work was done. The Ska had been herded back to their hovels. Soon the mists would come. Eventually, Kelsier sighed, then turned to pick his way around the furrows and pathways, weaving between large heaps of ash. He avoided stepping on the plants, though he wasn't sure why he bothered. The crops hardly seemed worth the effort. With wilted brown leaves, the plants seemed as depressed as the people who tended them. The Ska hovels loomed in the waning light. Already, Kelsier could see the mists beginning to form, clouding the air and giving the mound-like buildings a surreal, intangible look. The hovels stood unguarded. There was no need for watchers, for no skaa would venture outside once night arrived. Their fear of the mists were far too strong. Okay. I'll have to cure them of that someday, Kelsier thought as he approached one of the larger buildings, but all things in their own time. He pulled open the door and slipped inside. Conversation stopped immediately. Kelsier closed the door, then turned with a smile to confront the room of about 30 skaa. A fire pit burned weakly at the center, and the large cauldron beside it was filled with vegetable-dappled water, the beginnings of an evening meal. The soup would be bland, of course, but still, the smell was enticing. "Good evening, everyone," Kelsier said with a smile, resting his pack beside his feet and leaning against the door. "How was your day?" His words broke the silence, and the women returned to their dinner preparations. A group of men sitting at a crude table continued to regard Kelsier with dissatisfied expressions. "Our day was filled with work, traveler," said Tepper, one of the skaa elders, "something you managed to avoid." "Field work hasn't ever really suited me," Kelsier said. "It's far too hard on my delicate skin," he smiled, holding up hands and arms that were lined with layers and layers of thin scars. They covered his skin, running lengthwise as if some beast had repeatedly raked its claws up and down his arms. Tepper snorted. He was young to be an elder, probably barely into his 40s at most. He might be 5 years Kelsier's senior. However, the scrawny man held himself with the air of one who liked to be in charge. "This is no time for levity," Tepper said sternly. "When we harbor a traveler, we expect him to behave himself and avoid suspicion. When you ducked away from the fields this morning, you could have earned a whipping for the men around you." "True," Kelsier said, "but those men could also have been whipped for standing in the wrong place, for pausing too long, or for coughing when a taskmaster walked by. I once saw a man beaten because his master claimed that he had blinked inappropriately." Tepper sat with narrow eyes and a stiff posture, his arm resting on the table. His expression was unyielding. Kelsier sighed, rolling his eyes. "Fine. If you want me to go, I'll be off then." He slung his pack up on his shoulder and nonchalantly pulled open the door. "Open the door, mate." Don't do a Texas speech. Don't do it. Thick mist immediately began to pour through the portal, drifting lazily across Kelsier's body, pooling on the floor and creeping across the dirt like a hesitant animal. Okay. Several people gasped in horror, though most of them were too stunned to make a sound. Kelsier stood for a moment, staring out into the dark mist, then their shifting currents lit feebly by the cooking pit's coals. "Close the door." Tepper's words were a plea, not a command. Kelsier did as requested, pushing the door closed and stemming the flood of white mist. The mist is not what you think. You fear it far too much. "Men who venture into the mist lose their souls," a woman whispered. Her words raised a question. Had Kelsier walked in the mist? What then had happened to his soul? If you only knew, Kelsier thought. Well, I guess this means I'm staying. He waved for a boy to bring him a stool. It's a good thing to. It would have been a shame for me to leave before I shared my news. More than one person perked up at the comment.
"Hello KY, I come today for 2 reasons. The first is to tell you that you look very KY and lovely tonight. You are however still required to present an offering for the spork gods. All hail spork, we love the spork. Spork is good for you, and the second reason is to ask you to buy me McDonald's.
No!
My order is, get distracted you silly goose with a side of ha ha you bozo."
Bradley, no! Okay. It's a good thing, too. It would have been a shame for me to leave before I shared my news. More than one person perked up at the comment. This was the real reason they tolerated him. The reason the timid peasants would harbor a man such as Kelsier, a skaa who defied the Lord Ruler's will by traveling from plantation to plantation. A renegade he might be, a danger to the entire community, but he brought news from the outside world. "I come from the north," Kelsier said, "from lands where the Lord Ruler's touch is less noticeable." He spoke in a clear voice, and people leaned unconsciously toward him as they worked. On the next day, Kelsier's words would be repeated to the several hundred people who lived in other hovels. The Ska might be subservient, but they were incurable gossips. Local lords rule in the West, Kelsier said, and they are far from the iron grip of the Lord Ruler and his obligators. Some of these distant noblemen are finding that happy Ska make better workers than mistreated Ska. One man, Lord Renault, had ordered his taskmasters to stop unauthorized beatings. There are whispers that he's considering paying wages to his plantation Ska, like city craftsmen might earn. Nonsense, Tepper said. My apologies, Kelsier said. I didn't realize the good man Tepper had been to Lord Renault's estates recently when you dined with him last. Did he tell you something that he did not tell me? Tepper's face reddened. Ska did not travel, and they certainly didn't dine with lords. You think me a fool, traveler, but I know what you're doing. You're the one they call the survivor. Those scars on your arm give you away. You're a troublemaker. You travel the plantation stirring up discontent. You eat our food, telling your grand stories and your lies, then you disappear and leave people like me to deal with the false hopes you give our children. Kelsier raised an eyebrow. Now, Goodman Tepper, your worries are completely unfounded. Why, I have no intention of eating your food. I brought my own. With that, Kelsier reached over and tossed his pack onto the earth before Tepper's table. The loose bag slumped to the side, dumping an array of foods to the ground. Fine breads, fruit, and even a few thick, cured sausages bounced free. The summer fruit rolled across the packed earthen floor and bumped lightly against Tepper's foot. The middle-aged Ska regarded the fruit with stunned eyes. That's nobleman's food, Kelsier snorted. Barely. You know, for a man of renowned prestige and rank, your Lord Trusting has remarkably poor taste. His pantry is an embarrassment to his noble station. Tepper failed. That's where you went this afternoon, he whispered. You went to the manor. You stole from the master. Indeed, Kelsier said. And might I add that while your lord's taste in food is deplorable, his eye for soldiers is far more impressive. Sneaking into his manor during the day was quite a challenge. Tepper was still staring at the bag of food. If the taskmasters find this here, well, I suggest you make it disappear then, Kelsier said. I'd be willing to bet that it tastes a fair bit better than watered-down farlet soup. There's an ad in 5 minutes, by the way. Oh my gosh, this is so stressful. Oh my gosh. Okay, 24 sets of hungry eyes studied the food. If Tepper intended further arguments, he didn't make them quickly enough, for a silent pause was taken as agreement. Within a few minutes, the bag's contents had been inspected and distributed, and the pot of soup sat bubbling and ignored as the Ska feasted on a meal far more exotic. Kelsier settled back, leaning against the hovel's wooden wall, and watched the people devour their food. He had spoken correctly. The pantry's offerings had been depressingly mundane, but this was people who had been fed on nothing but soup and gruel since they were children. To them, breads and fruits were rare delicacies, usually eaten only as aging discards brought down by the house servants. Your storytelling was cut short, young man, an elderly Ska noted, hobbling over to sit on a stool beside Kelsier. Oh, I suspect there will be time for more later, Kelsier said. Once all evidence of my thievery has been properly devoured, don't you want any of it? No need, the old man said. The last time I tried Lords' food, I had stomach pains for 3 days. New tastes are like new ideas, young man. The older you get, the more difficult they are for you to stomach. Kelsier paused. The old man was hardly an imposing sight. His leathered skin and bald scalp made him look more frail than they did wise. Yet he had to be stronger than he looked. Few plantation Ska lived to such ages. Many lords didn't allow the elderly to remain home from daily work, and the frequent beatings that made up a Ska's life took a terrible toll on the elderly. What was your name again? Kelsier said. Minnis. Kelsier glanced back at Tepper. So, good man Minnis, tell me something. Why do you let him lead? Minnis shrugged. When you get to be my age, you have to be very careful where you waste your energy. Some battles simply aren't worth fighting. There was an implication in Minnis's eyes. He was referring to things greater than his own struggle with Tepper. Sorry, I have to get a drink. Oh my gosh. It's so stressful. An ad in 5 minutes? I know. Voice. Oh, frick, that's true. 2 minutes. It's interesting so far. You're satisfied with this then? Kelsier asked, nodding toward the hovel and its half-starved, overworked occupants. You're content with life full of beatings and endless drudgery? At least it's a life, Menace said. I know what wages, malcontent, and rebellion bring. The eye of the Lord Ruler and the ire of the Steel Ministry can be far more terrible than a few whippings. Men like you preach change, but I wonder, is this a battle we can really fight? You're fighting it already, Goodman Menace. You're just losing horribly. What do I know? I'm no more than a traveling miscreant, here to eat your food and impress your youths. Menace shook his head. You jest, but Tepper might have been right. I fear your visit will bring us grief. Kelsier smiled. That's why I didn't contradict him. At least not on the troublemaker point. He paused, then smiled more broadly. In fact, I'd say calling me a troublemaker is probably the only accurate thing Tepper has said since I got here. How do you do that? Menace asked, frowning. What? Smile so much. Oh, I'm just a happy person. Menace glanced down at Kelsier's hands. You know, I've only seen scars like those on one other person, and he was dead. His body was returned to Lord Trusting as proof that his punishment had been carried out. Menace looked up at Kelsier. He'd been caught speaking of rebellion. Trusting sent him to the pits of Hathsin, where he worked until he died. The lad lasted less than a month. Kelsier glanced down at his hands and forearms. They still burned sometimes, though he was certain the pain was only in his mind. He looked up at Menace and smiled. You ask why I smile, Goodman Menace. Well, the Lord Ruler thinks he has claimed laughter and joy for himself. I'm disinclined to let him do so. This is one battle that doesn't take much of an effort to fight. Menace stared at Kelsier, and for a moment Kelsier thought the old man might smile in return. But eventually Menace shook his head. I don't know. I just don't. The scream cut him off. It came from outside, perhaps to the north through the mist-distorted sounds. The people in the hovel fell silent, listening to the faint, high-pitched yells. Despite the distance in the mist, Kelsier could hear the pain contained in those screams. Kelsier burned 10. It was simple for him now, after years of practice. The tin sat with other allomantic metals within his stomach, swallowed earlier, waiting for him to draw upon them. He reached inside with his mind and touched the tin, tapping powers he will barely understand. The tin flared to life within him, burning his stomach like the sensation of a hot drink swallowed too quickly. Allomantic power surged through his body, enhancing his senses. The room around him became crisp, the dull fire pit flaring to near blinding brightness. He could feel the grain in the wood of the stool beneath him. He could still taste the remnants of the loaf of bread he'd snacked on earlier. Most importantly, he could hear the screams with supernatural ears. Okay, so he has powers? Okay, I'm learning things. 2 separate people were yelling. One was an older woman, the other a younger woman, perhaps a child. The younger screams were getting farther and further away. Poor Jess, a nearby woman said, her voice booming in Kelsier's enhanced ears. That child of hers was a curse. It's better for Ska not to have pretty daughters. Oh, I see what's happening. Tepper nodded. Lord Trusting was sure to send for the girl sooner or later. We all knew it. Jess knew it. Still ashamed, though, another man said. The screams continued in the distance. Burning tin, Kelsier was able to judge the direction accurately. Her voice was moving toward the Lord's manor. The sound set something off within him, and he felt his face flush with anger. Kelsier turned. Does Lord Trusting ever return the girls after he's finished with them? Old Menace shook his head. Lord Trusting is a law-abiding nobleman. He has the girls killed after a few weeks. He doesn't want to catch the eye of the Inquisitors. That was the Lord Ruler's command. He couldn't afford to have half-breed children running around. Children who might possess powers the Ska weren't supposed to know existed. The screamings waned, but Kelsier's anger only built. The yells reminded him of other screams. A woman's scream from the past. He stood abruptly, stool toppling to the ground beside him. Careful, lad, Menace said apprehensively. Remember what I said about wasting energy. You'll never raise that rebellion of yours if you get yourself killed tonight. Kelsier glanced toward the old man, then through the screams and the pain, he forced himself to smile. I'm not here to lead a rebellion among you, Goodman Minnis. I just want to stir up a little trouble. What good could that do? Kelsier's smile broadened. New days are coming, survive a little longer, and they might see great happenings in the final empire. I bid you all thanks for your hospitality. With that, he pulled open the door and strode out into the mist. Whoa. I think Kai might be Kelsier. Not only do they both share a K in their name, I've never seen Kai and Kelsier in the same... Dude, honestly, me either. Me and my 10 magic, that makes no sense. That really threw me off. I don't know why. Obviously, it's sci-fi. I should have known. Oh my gosh, so much talking. Makes no sense yet. Kai might be Kai, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. I think you're wrong. I think so. Or not. I don't know. I don't know, Jack. You could have done the B movie script. That's okay. That's okay. What's up, Rose? We're reading a book right now. Okay. I hope we can get... Oh yeah, I think we can. Okay. Minnis lay awake in the early hours of morning. It seemed that the older he became, the more difficult it was for him to sleep. That was particularly true when he was troubled about something, such as the traveler's failure to return to the hovel. Minnis hoped that Kelsier had come to his senses and decided to move on. However, that prospect seemed unlikely. Minnis had seen the fire in Kelsier's eyes. It seemed such a shame that a man who had survived the pits would instead find death here, on a random plantation trying to protect a girl everyone else had given up for dead. How would Lord Trusting react? He was said to be quite harsh with anyone who interrupted his nighttime enjoyments. If Kelsier had managed to disturb the master's pleasures, Trusting might easily decide to punish the rest of his skaa by association. Eventually, the other skaa began to wake. Minnis lay on the hard earth, bones aching, back complaining, muscles exhausted, trying to decide if it was worth rising. Each day, he nearly gave up. Each day, it was a little harder. Someday, he would simply stay in their hovel, waiting until the taskmasters came to kill those who were too sick or too elderly to work. But not today. He could see too much fear in the eyes of the skaa. They knew that Kelsier's nighttime activities would bring trouble. They needed Minnis. They looked to him. He needed to get up. And so he did. Once he started moving, the pains of age decreased slightly, and he was able to shuffle out of the hovel towards the fields, leaning on a younger man for support. It was then that he caught a scent in the air. What's that? He said. Do you smell smoke? Shum, the lad upon whom Minnis leaned, sniffed the air. The last remnants of the night's mist had burned away, and the red sun was rising behind the sky's usual haze of blackish clouds. I always smell smoke lately, Shum said. The ash mounts are violent this year. No, Minnis said, feeling increasingly apprehensive. This is different. He turned to the north, toward where a group of skaa were gathering. He let go of Shum, shuffling toward the group, feet kicking up dust and ash as he moved. At the center of the group, he found Jess. Her daughter, the one they had all assumed had been taken by Lord Trusting, stood beside her. The young girl's eyes were red from lack of sleep, but she appeared unharmed. She came back not long after they took her, the woman was explaining. She came and pounded on the door, crying in the mist. Flynn was sure it was a mist wraith impersonating her, but I had to let her in. I don't care what he says, I'm not giving her up. I brought her out in the sunlight and she didn't disappear. That proves she's not a mist wraith? What? Okay, I'm learning new things. Okay. Minnis stumbled back from the growing crowd. Did none of them see it? No taskmasters came to break up the group. No soldiers came to make up the morning population counts. Something was very wrong. Minnis continued to the north, moving frantically toward the manor house. By the time he arrived, others had noticed the twisting line of smoke that was barely visible in the morning light. Minnis wasn't the first to arrive at the edge of the short hilltop plateau, but the group made way for him when he did. The manor house was gone. Only a blackened, smoldering scar remained. By the Lord Ruler, Minnis whispered. What happened here? He killed them all. Minnis turned. The speaker was Jess's girl. She stood looking down at the fallen house, a satisfied expression on her youthful face. They were dead when he brought me out, she said. All of them. The soldiers, the taskmasters, the lords, dead. Even Lord Trusting and his obligators. The master had left me, going to investigate when the noises began. On the way out, I saw him lying in his own blood, stab wounds in his chest. The man who saved me threw a torch in the building as we left. This man, Minnis said. He had scars on his hands and arms, reaching past the elbows. The girl nodded silently. What kind of demon was that man? One of Ska muttered uncomfortably. Mist Wraith, another whispered, apparently forgetting that Kelsier had gone out during the day. But he did go out into the mist, Minnis thought. And how did he accomplish a feat like this? Lord Trusting kept over 24 soldiers. Did Kelsier have a hidden band of rebels, perhaps? Kelsier's words from the night before sounded in his ears. New days are coming. What of us? Tepper asked, terrified. What will happen when the Lord Ruler hears about this? He'll think that we did it. He'll send us to the pits, or maybe order his Koloss to slaughter us outright? Why would that troublemaker do something like this? Doesn't he understand the damage he's done? He understands, Minnis said. He warned us. He came to stir up trouble. But why? Because he knew we'd never rebel on our own. Rebel on our own. So he gave us no choice. Tepper paled. Lord Ruler, Minnis thought, I can't do this. I can barely get up in the mornings. I can't save these people. But what other choice was there? Minnis turned. Gather everyone, Tepper. We must flee before word of the disaster reaches the Lord Ruler. Where will we go? The caves to the east, Minnis said. Travelers say there are rebel Ska hiding in them. Perhaps they'll take us in. Tepper paled further, but we'd have to travel for days, spend nights in the mist. We can do that, Minnis said, or we can stay here and die. Tepper stood frozen for a moment, and Minnis thought the shock of it might have overwhelmed him. Eventually, however, the younger man scurried off to gather the others as commanded. Minnis sighed, looking up toward the trailing light of smoke, cursing the man Kelsier quietly in his mind. New days, indeed. All right. Yeah, I didn't realize you guys couldn't see the timer. Hold on. Hold on. That's the end of the prologue. Hold on. Oh, dagnabbit. Boom. All right, there it is. Booyah. Okay, people, let me get a drink really quick. We are on to part 1. The survivor of something. The survivor of Hathson. I consider myself to be a man of principle, but what man does not? Even the cutthroat, I have noticed, believes his actions to be moral after a fashion. Perhaps another person reading of my life would name me a religious tyrant. He could call me arrogant. What is to make that man's opinion any less valid than my own? I guess it all comes down to one fact. In the end, I'm the one with the armies. Ooh. Ash fell from the sky. Vin watched the downy flakes drift through the air. Leisurely, careless, free. The puffs of soot fell like black snowflakes, descending upon the dark city of Luthadel. They drifted in corners, blowing in the breeze and curling in tiny whirlwinds over the cobblestones. They seemed so uncaring. What would that be like? Vin sat quietly in one of the crew's watch holes, a hidden alcove built into the bricks on the side of the safe house. From within it, a crew member could watch the street for signs of danger. Vin wasn't on duty. The watch hole was simply one of the few places where she could find solitude. And Vin liked solitude. When you're alone, no one can betray you. Reen's words. Her brother had taught her so many things. then had reinforced them by doing what he'd always promised he would, by betraying her himself. It's the only way you'll learn. Anyone will betray you, Vin. Anyone. The ash continued to fall. Sometimes Vin imagined she was like the ash, or the wind, or the mist. A thing without thought, capable of simply being, not thinking, caring, or hurting. Then she could be free. She heard shuffling, a short distance away, then the trapdoor at the back of the small chamber snapped open. Vin, Lif said, sticking his head into the room. There you are. Cayman's been searching for you for a half hour. That's kind of why I hid in the first place. You should get going, Ulif said. The job's almost ready to begin. Ulif had a gangly... Oh, jeez. Ulif was a gangly boy. Nice after his own fashion, naive if one who had grown up in the underworld could ever really be called naive. Of course, that didn't mean he wouldn't betray her. Betrayal had nothing to do with friendship. It was a simple fact of survival. Life was harsh on the streets, and if a skaa thief wanted to keep from being caught and executed, he had to be practical. And ruthlessness was the most practical of emotions. Another of Reen's sayings. Well, Ulif said, you should go. Cayman's mad. When is he not? However, Vin nodded, scrambling out of the cramped yet comforting confines of the watch hole. She brushed past Ulif and hopped out of the trapdoor, moving into a hallway, then a rundown pantry. The room was one of the many at the back of the store that served as a front for the safe house. The crew's lair was hidden in a tunneled stone cavern beneath the building. She left the building through a back door, Ulif trailing behind her. The job would happen a few blocks away, in a richer section of town. It was an intricate job, one of the most complex Vin had ever seen. Assuming Cayman wasn't caught, the payoff would be great indeed. If he was caught, well, scamming noblemen and obligators were a very dangerous profession, but it certainly beat working in the forges or the textile mills. Vin exited the alleyway, moving out onto a dark, tenement-lined street in one of the city's many skaa slums. Skaa, too sick to work, lay huddled in corners and gutters, ash drifting around them. Vin kept her head down and pulled up her cloak's hood against the still falling flakes. Free. No, I'll never be free. Reen made certain of that when he left. There you are, Cayman lifted a squat, fat finger and jabbed it toward her face. Where were you? Vin didn't let... I can't read, I'm sorry. Vin didn't let hatred or rebellion show in her eyes. She simply looked down, giving Cayman what he expected to see. There were other ways to be strong. That lesson she had learned on her own. Cayman growled slightly, then raised his hand and backhanded her across the face. The force of the blow threw Vin back against the wall, and her cheek blazed with pain. She slumped against the wood, but bore the punishment silently. Merely another bruise. She was strong enough to deal with it. She'd done it before. Listen, Cayman hissed. This is an important job. It's worth thousands of boxings. Worth more than you 100 times over. I won't have you fouling it up. Understood? Vin nodded. Cayman studied her for a moment, his pudgy face red with anger. Finally, he looked away, muttering to himself. He was annoyed about something. Something more than just Vin. Perhaps he heard about the Skaa Rebellion several days to the north. One of the provincial lords, Themos Tresting, had apparently been murdered. His manor burned to the ground. Some disturbances were bad for business. They made the aristocracy more alert and less gullible. That in turn could cut seriously into Cayman's profits. He's looking for someone to punish, Vin thought. He always gets nervous before a job. She looked up at Cayman, tasting blood on her lip. She must have let some of her confidence show, because he glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, and his expression darkened. He raised his hand as if to strike her again. Vin used up a bit of her luck. She expended only a smidgen. She'd need the rest for the job. She directed the luck at Cayman, calming his nervousness. The crew leader paused, oblivious to Vin's touch, yet feeling its effects nonetheless. He stood for a moment, then he sighed, turning and lowering his hand. Vin wiped her lip as Cayman waddled away. The thief master looked quite convincing with his nobleman's suit. It was a rich costume as Vin had ever seen. It had a white... Oh my gosh. It had a white shirt overlaid by a deep green vest with engraved gold buttons. The black suit coat was long, after the current fashion, and he wore a matching black hat. His fingers sparkled with rings, and he carried a fine dueling cane. Indeed, Cayman did an excellent job of imitating a nobleman. When it came to playing a role, there were few thieves more competent than Cayman, assuming he could keep his temper under control. The room they were in was less impressive. Vin pulled herself to her feet as Cayman began to snap at some of the other crew members. They had rented one of the suites at the top of a local hotel. Not too lavish, but that was the idea. Cayman was going to be playing the part of Lord Jadu, a country nobleman who had hit upon hard financial times and came to Luthadel to get some final, desperate contracts. The main room had been transformed into a sort of audience chamber, set with a large desk for Cayman to sit behind. The walls decorated with cheap pieces of art. Two men stood beside the desk, dressed in formal steward's clothing. They would play the part of Cayman's manservants. "What is this ruckus?" a man asked, entering the room. He was tall, dressed in a simple gray suit and a pair of slacks, with a thin sword tied at his waist. Theron was the other crew leader. This particular scam was actually his. He'd brought in Cayman as a partner. He needed someone to play Lord Jadu, and everyone knew that Cayman was one of the best. Cayman looked up. Ruckus? Oh, that was nothing more than a minor discipline problem. Don't bother yourself, Theron. Cayman punctuated his remark with a dismissive wave of the hand. There was a reason he played such a good aristocrat. He was arrogant enough that he could have been from one of the great houses. Theron's eyes narrowed. Vin knew what the man was probably thinking. He was deciding how risky it would be to put a knife in Cayman's fat back once the scam was over. Eventually, the taller crew leader looked away from Cayman, glancing at Vin. "Who's this?" he asked. "Just a member of my crew," Cayman said. "I thought we didn't need anyone else." "Well, we need her," Cayman said. "Ignore her. My end of the operation is none of your concern." Theron eyed Vin, obviously noting her bloodied lip. She glanced away. But Theron's eyes lingered on her, running down the length of her body. She wore a simple white button shirt and a pair of overalls. Indeed, she was hardly enticing, scrawny, with a youthful face. She didn't even look 16 years old. She considered using a bit of luck on him, but eventually he turned away. "The obligator is nearly there," Theron said. "Are you ready?" Cayman rolled his eyes, setting his bulk down into the chair behind the desk. "Everything is perfect. Leave me be, Theron. Go back to your room and wait." Theron frowned, then spun and walked from the room, muttering to himself. Vin scanned the room, studying the decor, the servants, the atmosphere. Finally, she made her way to Cayman's desk. The crew leader sat rifling through a stack of papers, apparently trying to decide which ones to put on the desktop. "Cayman," Vin said quietly. "The servants are too fine." Cayman frowned, looking up. "What is that you're babbling?" "The servants," Vin repeated, still speaking in a soft whisper. "Lord Jadu is supposed to be desperate. He'd have rich clothing left over from before, but he wouldn't be able to afford such rich servants. He'd use ska." Cayman glared at her, but then glanced at the servants. Physically, there was little difference between noblemen and ska. However, the servants Cayman had appointed were dressed as minor noblemen. They were allowed to wear colorful vests, and they stood a little more confidently. Yo, thanks for the follow, Cool Snap. Welcome in. 1 second. Scare me. I didn't realize that wasn't working. Oh, jeez. Thank you. The obligator has to think that you're nearly impoverished. Vin said, "Pack the room with a lot of ska servants instead." "What do you know?" Cayman said, scowling at her. "Enough." She immediately regretted the word. It sounded too rebellious. Cayman raised a bejeweled hand, and Vin braced herself for another slap. She couldn't afford to use up any more luck. She had precious little remaining anyway. But Cayman didn't hit her. Instead, he sighed and rested a pudgy hand on her shoulder. "Why do you insist on provoking me, Vin? You know the debts your brother left when he ran away. Do you realize that a less merciful man than myself would have sold you to a bad place long ago? How would you like that? Serving in some nobleman..." Okay. Vin looked down at her feet. Cayman's grip grew tight, his fingers pinching her skin where neck met shoulder, and she gasped in pain despite herself. He grinned. Okay. Honestly, I don't know why I keep you. Then, he said, increasing the pressure of his grip, I should have gotten rid of you months ago, when your brother betrayed me. I suppose I just have too kindly a heart. He finally released her, then pointed for her to stand over by the side of the room, next to a tall indoor plant. She did as ordered, orienting herself so she had a good view of the entire room. As soon as Cayman looked away, she rubbed her shoulder. Merely another pain. I can deal with pain. Cayman sat for a few moments, then, as expected, he waved to the two servants at his side. You two, he said. You're dressed too richly. Go put on something that makes you look like skaa servants instead, and bring back 6 more men with you when you come. Soon the room was filled as Vin had suggested. The obligator arrived a short time later. Vin watched Prelin Laird step haughtily into the room, shaved bald like all obligators. He wore a set of dark gray robes. The ministry tattoos around his eyes identified him as a Prelin. Prelin? A senior bureaucrat in the ministry's canton of finance. A set of lesser obligators trailed behind him, their eye tattoos far less intricate. Cayman rose as the Prelin entered, a sign of respect, sometimes something even the highest of great house noblemen would show to an obligator of Laird's rank. Laird gave no bow or acknowledgement of his own, instead striding forward and taking the seat in front of Cayman's desk. One of the crewmen, impersonating a servant, rushed forward, bringing chilled wine and fruit for the obligator. Laird picked at the fruit, letting the servant stand obediently, holding the platter of food as if they were a piece of furniture. Lord Jadoo, Laird finally said, I'm glad we finally have the opportunity to meet. As am I, Your Grace, Canon said. So apparently my song requests were off. Or on. Jeez Louise. It's like, this is a lot different than we've been listening to. Okay, where was I? As am I, Your Grace, Canon said. Why is it again that you were unable to come to the Canton building, instead requiring that I visit you here? My knees, Your Grace, Cayman said. My physicians recommend that I travel as little as possible. And you were right. And you were rightly apprehensive without being drawn into a ministry stronghold, Ven thought. I see, Laird said. Bad knees. An unfortunate attribute in a man who deals in transportation. I don't have to go on the trips, Your Grace, Cayman said, bowing his head. Just organize them. Good, Ven thought. Make sure you remain subservient, Cayman. You need to seem desperate. Vin needed this scam to succeed. Cayman threatened her and he beat her, but he considered her a good luck charm. She wasn't sure if he knew why his plans weren't better when she was in the room, but he had apparently made the connection. That made her valuable. And Reed had always said that the surest way to stay alive in the underworld was to make yourself indispensable. I see, Laird said again. Well, I fear that our meeting has come too late for your purposes. The Canton of Finance has already voted on your proposal. So soon? Cayman asked with a genuine surprise. Yes, Laird replied, taking a sip of his wine, still not dismissing the servant. We've decided not to accept your contract. Cayman sat for a moment, stunned. I'm sorry to hear that, Your Grace. Laird came to meet you, Vin thought. That means he's still in a position to negotiate. Indeed, Cayman continued, seeing what Vin had. That is especially unfortunate, as I am ready to make the ministry an even better offer. Laird raised a tattooed eyebrow. I doubt it will matter. There's an element of the council who feels that the canton would receive better service if we found a more stable house to transport our people. That would be a grave mistake, Cannon said smoothly. Let us be frank, Your Grace. We both knew that this contract is House Jadoo's last chance. Now that we've lost the Farwind deal, we cannot afford to run our canal boats to Luthadel anymore. Without the ministry's patronage, my house is financially doomed. This is doing little to persuade me, Your Lordship, the obligator said. Truly, Cayman said. Ask yourself this. Your Grace, who will serve you better? Will it be the house that has dozens of contracts to divide its attention, or the house that views your contracts as its last hope? The Canton of Finance will not find a more accommodating partner than a desperate one. Let my boats be the ones that bring your acolytes down from the north. Let my soldiers escort them, and you will not be disappointed. Good, Vin thought. I see, the obligator said, now troubled. I would be willing to give you an extended contract, looked in at the price of 50 boxings a head per trip, your grace. Your acolytes would be able to travel on your boats at their leisure, and would always have the escorts they need. This time the obligator's eyebrows rose even higher. That's half the former fee. I told you, Cayman said. We're desperate. My house needs to keep its boats running. 50 boxings will not make us a profit, but that doesn't matter. Once we have the ministry contract to bring us stability, we can find other contracts to fill our coffers. Laird looked thoughtful. It was a fabulous deal, one that might ordinarily have been suspicious, but Cayman's presentation constructed the image of a house on the brink of financial collapse. The other crew leader, Theron, had spent 5 years building, scamming, and finagling to create this moment. The ministry would be remiss not to consider this opportunity. Laird was realizing just that. The Steel Ministry was not only the force of bureaucracy and legal authority in the final empire. It was like a noble house unto itself. The more wealth it had, the better its own mercantile contracts. The more leverage the various ministry cantons had with each other, and with the noble houses. However, Laird was obviously still hesitant. Vin could see the look in his eyes, the suspicion she knew well. He was not going to take the contract. Now, Vin thought. It's my turn. Vin used her luck on Laird. She reached out tentatively, not really sure what she was doing or why she could even do it, yet her touch was instinctive, trained through years of subtle practices. She'd been 10 years old before she'd realized that other people couldn't do what she could. She pressed against Laird's emotions, dampening them. He became less suspicious, less afraid, docile. His worries melted away, and Vin could see a calm sense of control begin to assert itself in his eyes. Yet Laird still seemed slightly uncertain. Vin pushed harder. He cocked his head, looking thoughtful. He opened his mouth to speak, but she pushed against him further, desperately using up her last pinch of luck. He hesitated again. Very well, he finally said. I will take this new proposal to the council. Perhaps an agreement can still be reached. That is the end of the chapter. We have 4 minutes left. I don't know. What? Unable to verify. There we go. Hydrate. It's a good book so far. I don't know, I feel like we're gonna go too far. I feel like it's gonna take too long. Unless you want it to roll over to the other thing. You want me to read more chapter? My gosh. My throat. What's up, Cerno? What's bobbin'? As long as you want. It hurts my throat. It hurts my throat to read that much. It's up to you. Otherwise, I think we're at a good stopping place to go to the next thing. One more chapter? Alright. Gonna start the book over? Yes. Are you ready? Alright. Chapter 2. If men read these words, let them know that power is a heavy burden. Seek not to be bound by its chains. The terrorist prophecies say that I will have the power to save the world. They hint, however, that I have the power to destroy it as well. Hold on one second, I'm about to do this. Okay. Alright. They hint, however, that I will have the power to destroy it as well. In Kelsier's opinion, the city of Luthadel, seat of the Lord Ruler, was a gloomy sight. Most of the buildings had been built from stone blocks, with tile roofs for the wealthy and simple, peaked wooden roofs for the rest. The structures were packed closely together, making them seem squat despite the fact that they were generally 3 stories high. The tenements and shops were uniform in appearance. This was not a place to draw attention to oneself, unless, of course, you were a member of the high nobility. Interspersed throughout the city were a dozen or so monolithic keeps, intricate with rows of spear-like spires or deep archways. These were the homes of the high nobility. In fact, these were the mark of a high noble family. Any family who could afford to build a keep and maintain a high-profile presence in Luthadel were considered to be a great house. Most of the open ground in the city was around these keeps. The patches of space amid the tenements were like clearings in a forest. The keeps like solitary mounts rising above the landscape. Black mountains, like the rest of the city. The keeps were stained by countless years of ash falls. Every structure in Luthadel, virtually every structure Kelsier had ever seen, had been blackened to some degree. Even the city wall, upon which Kelsier now stood, was blackened by a patina of soot. Structures were generally darkest at the top, where the ash gathered, but rainwater and even condensation had carried the stains over ledges and down walls. Hold on one second. That's not the... Oh, sorry. Yeah, I gotta work on that. Okay. Like paint running down a canvas, the darkness seemed to creep down the sides of buildings in an uneven gradient. The streets, of course, were completely black. Kelsier stood waiting, scanning the city as a group of ska workers toiled in the street below, clearing away the latest mounds of ash. They take it to the river Chanarel, which ran through the center of the city, sending the heaps of ash to be washed away, lest it pile up and ultimately bury the city. Sometimes Kelsier wondered why the entire empire wasn't one big mound of ash. He supposed the ash must break down into soil eventually. Yet, it took a ridiculous amount of effort to keep cities and fields clear enough to be used. Fortunately, there were always enough ska to do the work. The laborers below him wore simple coats and trousers, ash-stained and worn. Like the plantation workers he had left behind several weeks before, they toiled with beaten-down, despondent motions. Other groups of ska passed the laborers, responding to the bells in the distance, chiming the hour and calling them to their morning's work as the forges or mills. Luthadel's main export was metal. The city was home to hundreds of forges and refineries. However, the surgings of the river provided excellent location for mills, both to grind grains and make textiles. The ska continued to toil. Kelsier turned away from them, looking up into the distance toward the city center, where the Lord Ruler's palace loomed like some kind of massive multi-spined insect. Credit Shaw, the hill of 1,000 spires. The palace was several times the size of any nobleman's cape, and was by far the largest building in the city. Another ashfall began as Kelsier stood contemplating the city, the flakes falling lightly down upon the streets and buildings. A lot of ash falls lately, he thought, glad for the excuse to pull up the hood on his cloak. The ash mounts must be active. It was unlikely that anyone in Luthadel would recognize him. It had been 3 years since his capture. Still, the hood was reassuring. If all went well, there would come a time when Kelsier would want to be seen and recognized. For now, anonymity was probably better. Eventually, a figure approached along the wall. The man Doxxing was shorter than Kelsier, and he had a squarish face that seemed well suited to his moderately stocky build. A nondescript brown hooded cloak covered his black hair, and he wore the same short half-beard that he'd sported since his face had first put forth whiskers some 20 years before. He, like Kelsier, wore a nobleman's suit, colored vest, dark coat and trousers, and a thin cloak to keep off the ash. The clothing wasn't rich, but it was aristocratic, indicative of the Luthadel middle class. Most men of noble birth weren't wealthy enough to be considered part of a great house. Yet, in the final empire, nobility wasn't just about money. It was about lineage and history. The Lord Ruler was immortal, and he apparently still remembered the men who had supported him during the early years of his reign. The descendants of those men, no matter how poor they became, would always be favored. The clothing would keep passing guard patrols from asking too many questions. In the cases of Kelsier and Doxxing, that clothing was a lie. Neither was actually noble, though technically Kelsier was a half-blood. In many ways, that was worse than being a normal Ska. Doxxing strolled up next to Kelsier, then leaned against the battlement, resting a pair of stout arms on the stone. "You're a few days late, Kel. I decided to make a few extra stops in the plantations in the north." "Ah," Doxxing said, "so you did have something to do with Lord Treston's death." Kelsier smiled. "You could say that." His murder caused quite a stir among the local nobility. "That was kind of the intention," Kelsier said. "Though to be honest, I wasn't planning anything quite so dramatic. It was almost more of an accident than anything else." Doxxing raised an eyebrow. "How do you accidentally kill a nobleman in his mansion?" "With a knife in his chest," Kelsier said lightly. "Or rather, a pair of knives in the chest. It always pays to be careful." Doxxing rolled his eyes. "His death isn't exactly a loss, Dox," Kelsier said. "Even among the nobility, Tresting had a reputation for cruelty." "I don't care about Tresting," Doxxing said. "I'm just considering the state of insanity that led me to plan another job with you. Attacking a provincial lord in his manor house, surrounded by guards. Honestly, Kel, I'd nearly forgotten how foolhardy you can be." "Foolhardy?" Kelsier asked with a laugh. "That wasn't foolhardy. That was merely a small diversion. You should see some of the things I'm planning to do." Doxxing stood for a moment, then he laughed too. "By the Lord Ruler, it's good to have you back, Kel. I'm afraid I've grown particularly boring during the last few years." "We'll fix that," Kelsier promised. He took a deep breath, ash falling lightly around him. Ska cleaning crews were already back at work on the streets below, brushing up the dark ash. Behind, a guard patrol passed, nodding to Kelsier and Doxxing. They waited in silence for the men to move on. "It's good to be back," Kelsier finally said. "There's something homey about Luthadel, even if it's depressing." You have the meeting organized?" Doxxing nodded. "We can't start until this evening, though. How'd you get in, anyway?" "I had men watching the gates." "Oh, I snuck in last night." "But how?" Doxxing paused. "Oh, right. That's gonna take some getting used to." Kelsier shrugged. "I don't see why. You always work with mistings." "Yes, but this is different," Doxxing said. He held up a hand to forestall further argument. "No need, Kel. I'm not hedging. I only said it would take some getting used to." "Fine. Who's coming tonight?" "Well, Breeze and Ham will be there, of course. They're very curious about this mystery job of ours. Not to mention, rather annoyed that I won't tell them what you've been up to these past few years." "Good," Kelsier said with a smile. "Let them wonder. How about Trap?" Doxxing shook his head. "Trap's dead. The ministry finally caught up with him a couple months ago. Didn't even bother sending him to the pits. They beheaded him on the spot." Kelsier closed his eyes, exhaling softly. It seemed that the Steel Ministry caught up with everyone eventually. Sometimes Kelsier felt that a Ska Misting's life wasn't so much about surviving as it was about picking the right time to die. "Jeez, okay. This leaves us without a smoker," Kelsier finally said, opening his eyes. "You have any suggestions?" "Ruddy," Doxxing said. Kelsier shook his head. "No, he's a good smoker, but he's not a good enough man." Doxxing smiled. "Not a good enough man to be on a thieving crew. Kel, I have missed working with you." "All right, then. Who?" Kelsier thought for a moment. "Is Club still running the shop of his?" "As far as I know," Doxxing said slowly. "He's supposed to be one of the best smokers in the city." "I suppose," Doxxing said, "but isn't he supposed to be kind of hard to work with?" "He's not so bad," Kelsier said. "Not once you get used to him. Besides, I think he might be amendable to this particular job." "All right," Doxxing said, shrugging. "I'll invite him. I think one of his relatives is a Tenai. Do you want me to invite him too?" "Sounds good," Kelsier said. "All right," Doxxing said. "Well, beyond that, there's just Yaden, assuming he's still interested." "He'll be there," Kelsier said. "He'd better be," Doxxing replied. "He'll be the one paying us after all." Kelsier nodded, then frowned. You didn't mention Marsh." Doxxing shrugged. "I warned you. Your brother never did approve of our methods. And now, well, you know Marsh. He won't have anything to do with Yedin and the rebellion anymore, let alone with a bunch of criminals like us. I think we'll have to find someone else to infiltrate the obligators. No, Kelsier said. He'll do it. Once I stop by to persuade him. If you say so, Doxxing fell silent then, and the two stood for a moment, leaning against the rail and looking out over the ash-stained city. Doxxing finally sighed. This is insane, eh? Kelsier smiled. Feels good, doesn't it? Doxxing nodded. Fantastic. It will be a job like no other, Kelsier said, looking north, across the city, and toward the twisted building at its center. Doxxing stepped away from the wall. We have a few hours before the meeting. There's something I want to show you. I think there's still time if we hurry. Kelsier turned with curious eyes. Well, I was going to go and chastise my prude of a brother, but this will be worth your time, Doxxing promised. Finn sat in the corner of the safe house's main lair. She kept to the shadows, as usual. The more she stayed out of sight, the more the others would ignore her. She couldn't afford to expend luck keeping the men's hands off of her. She'd barely had time to regenerate what she'd used a few days before, during the meeting with the obligator. The usual rabble lounged at tables in the room, playing at dice or discussing minor jobs. Smoke from a dozen different pipes pooled at the top of the chamber, and the walls were stained dark from countless years of similar treatment. The floor was darkened with patches of ash. Like most thieving crews, Cayman's group wasn't known for its tidiness. There was a door at the back of the room. Beyond it lay a twisting stone stairwell that led up to a false rain gate in an alleyway. This room, like so many others hidden in the imperial capital of Luthadel, wasn't supposed to exist. Rough laughter came from the front of the chamber, where Cayman sat with a half-dozen cronies, enjoying a typical afternoon of ale and crass jokes. Cayman's table sat beside the bar, where the overpriced drinks were simply another way Cayman exploited those who worked for him. The Luthadel criminal element had learned quite well from the lessons taught by the nobility. Vin tried her best to remain invisible. 6 months before, she wouldn't have believed that her life would actually get worse without Reen. Yet despite her brother's abusive anger, he had kept the other crew members from having their way with Vin. There were relatively few women on thieving crews. Generally, those women who got involved... okay. We're not good! Okay. Reen had always told her that a girl needed to be tough, even tougher than a man, if she wanted to survive. You think some crew leader's gonna want a liability like you on his team, he had said. Even I don't want to have to work with you, and I'm your brother. Her back still throbbed. Cayman had whipped her the day before. The blood would ruin her shirt, and she wouldn't be able to afford another one. Cayman was already retaining her wages to pay the debts Reen had left behind. But I'm strong, she thought. That was the irony. The beatings almost didn't hurt anymore, but Reen's frequent abuses had left Vin resilient, while at the same time teaching her how to look pathetic and broken. In a way, the beatings were self-defeating. Bruises and welts mended, but each new lashing left Vin more hardened and strong. Cayman stood up. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out his golden pocket watch. He nodded to one of his companions, then he scanned the room, searching for her. His eyes locked on Vin. It's time. Vin frowned. Time for what? The Ministry's Canton of Finance was an imposing structure, but then everything about the Steel Ministry tended to be imposing. Tall and blocky, the building had a massive rose window in the front, though the glass was dark from the outside. 2 large banners hung down beside the window, the soot-stained red cloth proclaiming praises to the Lord Ruler. Cayman studied the building with a critical eye. Vin could sense his apprehension. The Canton of Finance was hardly the most threatening of ministry offices. The Canton of Inquisition, or even the Canton of Orthodoxy, had a far more ominous reputation. However, voluntarily entering any ministry office, putting yourself in the power of the obligators, well, it was a thing to do only after serious consideration. Cayman took a deep breath, then strode forward, his dueling cane tapping against the stones as he walked. He wore his rich nobleman's suit, and he was accompanied by a half-dozen crew members, including Vin, to act as his servants. Vin followed Cayman up the steps, then waited as one of the crew members jumped forward to pull the door open for his master. Of the 6 attendants, only Vin seemed to have been told nothing of Cayman's plan. Suspiciously, Theron, Cayman's supposed partner in the ministry scam, was nowhere to be seen. Vin entered the Canton building. Vibrant red light, sparkling with lines of blue, fell from the rose window. A single obligator with mid-level tattoos around his eyes sat behind a desk at the end of the extended entryway. Cayman approached, his cane thumping against the carpet as he walked. "I am Lord Jadu," he said. "What are you doing here?" Cayman, Vin thought. "You insisted to Theron that you wouldn't meet with Prelane Laird in his Canton office. Yet now you're here." The obligator nodded, making a notation in his ledger. He waved to the side. "You may take 1 attendant with you into the waiting chamber. The rest must remain here." Cayman's huff of disdain indicated what he thought of that prohibition. But the obligator didn't look up from his ledger. Cayman stood for a moment, and Vin couldn't tell if he was genuinely angry or just playing the part of an arrogant nobleman. Finally, he jabbed a finger at Vin. "Come," he said, turning and waddling toward the indicated door. The room beyond was lavish and plush, and several noblemen lounged in various postures of waiting. Cayman chose a chair and settled into it, then pointed toward a table set with wine and red frosted cakes. Vin obediently fetched him a glass of wine and a plate of food, ignoring her own hunger. Cayman began to pick at the cakes, smacking quietly as he ate. He's nervous, even more nervous than before. "Once we get in, you will say nothing," Cayman grumbled between bites. "You're betraying Theron," Vin whispered. Cayman nodded. "But how? Why?" Theron's plan was complex in execution, but simple in concept. Every year, the ministry transferred its new acolyte obligators from a northern training facility south to Luthadel for final instruction. Theron had discovered that those acolytes and their overseers brought down with them large amounts of ministry funds, disguised as baggage to be strongholded in Luthadel. Banditry was rather difficult in the final empire, what with the constant patrols along canal routes. However, if one were running the very canal boats that the acolytes were sailing upon, a robbery could become possible. Arranged at just the right time, the guards turn on their passengers. A man could make quite a profit, then blame it on banditry. "Theron's crew is weak," Cayman said. "He expended too many resources on this job. But the return he'll make," Vin said, "will never happen if I take what I can now, then run," Cayman said, smiling. I gotta get water. Oh my gosh. He said, "This is why reading is important." I didn't read the caption on stream, and now you're stuck here, man. Okay. Let's see. Where was I? Okay. "I'll take the obligators into a down payment to get my caravan boats afloat, then disappear and leave Theron to deal with the disaster when the ministry realizes that it's been scammed." Vin stood back, slightly shocked. Setting up a scam like this would have cost Theron thousands upon thousands of boxings. If the deal fell through now, he would be ruined. And with the ministry hunting him, he wouldn't have time to seek revenge. Cayman would make a quick profit, as well as get rid himself of one of his most powerful rivals. Theron was a fool to bring Cayman into this, she thought. But then, the amount Theron had promised to pay Cayman was great. He probably assumed Cayman's greed would keep him honest until Theron himself could pull a double cross. Cayman had simply worked faster than anyone, including Vin, had expected. How could Theron have known that Cayman would undermine the job rather than wait and try and steal the entire haul from the caravan boats? Vin's stomach twisted. It's just another betrayal, she thought sickly. Why does it still bother me so? Everyone betrays everyone else. That's the way life is. She wanted to find a corner, someplace cramped and secluded, and hide, alone. Anyone will betray you. Anyone. But there was no place to go. Eventually, a minor obligator, entered and called for Lord Jadu. Vin followed Cayman as they were ushered into an audience chamber. The man who waited inside, sitting behind the audience desk, was not Prelin Lard. Cayman paused in the doorway. The room was austere, bearing only the desk and simply gray carpeting. The stone walls were unadorned. The single window barely a handspan wide. The obligator who waited for them had some of the most intricate tattoos around his eyes that Finn had ever seen. She wasn't certain what rank they implied, but they extended all the way back to the obligator's ears and up over his forehead. Lord Jadu, the strange obligator said. Like Laird, he wore gray robes. But he was very different from the stern, bureaucratic men Cayman had dealt with before. This man was lean in a muscular way, and his clean-shaven triangular head gave him an almost predatory look. I was under the impression that I would be meeting with Prelin Lard, Cayman said, still not moving into the room. Prelin Lard had been called away on other business. I am High Prelin Arive, head of the board that was reviewing your proposal. You have a rare opportunity to address me directly. I normally don't hear cases in person, but Laird's absence had made it necessary for me to share in some of his work. Vin's instincts made her tense. We should go. Now. Cayman stood for a long moment, and Vin could see him mulling it over. Run now, or take a risk for the greater prize? Vin didn't care about prizes. She just wanted to live. But Cayman had not become crew leader without the occasional gamble. He slowly moved into the room, eyes cautious as he took the seat opposite the obligator. Well, High Prelin Arive, Cayman said with a careful voice, I assume that since I have been called back for another appointment, the board is considering my offer? Indeed we are, the obligator said, though I must admit there were some council members who are apprehensive about dealing with a family that is so near to economic disaster. The ministry generally prefers to be conservative in the financial operations. I see. But, Arive said, there are others on the board who are rather eager to take advantage of the savings you offered us. And with which group do you identify, Your Grace? I, as of yet, have not made my decision, the obligator leaned forward, which is why I noted that you have a rare opportunity. Convince me, Lord Jadu, and you will have your contract. Surely Prelin Laird overlaid the details of our offer, Cayman said. Yes, but I would like to hear the arguments from you personally. Humor me. Vin frowned. She remained near the back of the room, standing near the door, still half convinced she should run. Well, Arive said. We need this contract, Your Grace, Cayman said. Without it, we won't be able to continue our canal shipping operations. Your contract would give us a much-needed period of stability, a chance to maintain our caravan boats for a time while we search for other contracts. Arive studied Cayman for a moment. Surely you can do better than that, Lord Jadu, Laird said. Laird said that you were quite persuasive. Let me hear you prove that you deserve our patronage. Vin prepared her luck. She could have Arive more inclined to believe, but something restrained her. The situation felt wrong. We are your best choice, Your Grace, Cayman said. You fear that my house will suffer economic failure? Well, if it does, what have you lost? At worst, my narrow boats would stop running, and you would have to find other merchants to deal with. Yet, if your patronage is enough to maintain my house, then you have found yourself an inviolable, long-term contract. I see, Arive said lightly. And why the ministry? Why not make your deal with something else? Surely there are other options for your boats. Other groups who would jump at such rates? Cayman frowned. This isn't about money, Your Grace. It is about the victory. The showing of confidence that we would gain by having a ministry contract. If you trust us, others will too. I need your support. Cayman was sweating now. He was probably beginning to regret this gamble. Had he been betrayed? Was Theron behind the odd meeting? The obligator waited quietly. He could destroy them, Vin knew. If he suspected that they were scamming him, he would give them over to the Canton of Inquisition. More than one nobleman had entered a Canton building and never returned. Gritting her teeth, Vin reached out and used her luck on the obligator, making him less suspicious. Arive smiled. Well, you've convinced me, he suddenly declared. Cayman sighed in relief. Arive continued. Your most recent letter suggested that you need 3,000 boxings as an advance to refurbish your equipment and resume shipping operations. See the scribe in the main hallway to finish the paperwork so that you may requisition the necessary funds. The obligator pulled a sheet of thick bureaucratic paper from a stack, then stamped a seal at the bottom. He proffered it to Cayman, your contract. Cayman smiled deeply. I knew something to the ministry was the wise choice. Oh, I'm sorry, I knew coming to the ministry was the wise choice, he said, accepting the contract. He stood nodding respectfully to the obligator, then motioned for Vin to open the door for him. She did so. Something is wrong. Something is very wrong. She paused as Cayman left, looking back at the obligator. He was still smiling. A happy obligator was always a bad sign. Yet no one stopped as they passed through the waiting room with its noble occupants. Cayman sealed and delivered the contract to the appropriate scribe, and no soldiers appeared to arrest them. The scribe pulled out a small chest filled with coins, and then handed it to Cayman with an indifferent hand. Then they simply left the Canton building. Cayman gathered his other attendants with obvious relief. No cries of alarm, no tromping of soldiers. They were free. Cayman had successfully scammed both the ministry and another crew leader. Apparently. Kelsier stuffed another one of the little red frosted cakes into his mouth, chewing with satisfaction. The fat thief and his scrawny attendant passed through the waiting room, entering the entryway beyond. The obligator who had interviewed the two thieves remained in his office, apparently awaiting his next appointment. Wait, hold on now. Okay. Well, Doxxing said, what do you think? Kelsier glanced at the cakes. They're quite good, he said, taking another one. The ministry had always had excellent taste. It makes sense that they would provide superior snacks. Doxxing rolled his eyes. About the girl, Kel. Kelsier smiled as he piled 4 of the cakes in his hands, then nodded toward the doorway. The Canton waiting room was growing too busy for the discussion of delicate matters. On the way out, he stopped and told the obligatory secretary in the corner that they needed to reschedule. Then the two crossed through the entry chamber, passing the overweight crew leader who stood speaking with a scribe. Kelsier stepped out onto the street, pulled his hood up against the still falling ash, then led the way across the street. He lingered beside an alleyway, standing where he and Doxxing could watch the Canton building's doors. Kelsier munched contentedly on his cakes. How did you find out about her? He asked, between bites. Your brother, Doxxing replied. Cayman tried to swindle Marsh a few months ago, and he brought the girl with him then too. Actually, Cayman's little good luck charm is becoming moderately famous in the right circles. I'm still not sure if he knows what she is or not. You know how superstitious thieves can get. Kelsier nodded, dusting off his hands. How do you know she'd be here today? Doxxing shrugged. A few bribes in the right place. I've been keeping an eye on the girl ever since Marsh pointed her out to me. I wanted to give you an opportunity to see her work for yourself. Across the street, Canton building's door finally opened, and Cayman made his way down the steps surrounded by a group of servants. The small, short-haired girl was with him. The sight of her made Kelsier frown. She had a nervous anxiety to her step, and she jumped slightly whenever someone made a quick move. The right side of her face was still slightly discolored from a partially healed bruise. Kelsier eyed the self-important Cayman. I'll have to come up with something particularly suitable to do to that man. Poor thing, Doxxing muttered. Kelsier nodded. She'll be free of him soon enough. It's a wonder no one discovered her before this. Your brother was right then? Kelsier nodded. She's at least a misting, and if Marsh says she's more, I can't speak. I'm inclined to believe him. I'm a bit surprised to see her using allomancy on a member of the ministry, especially inside a Canton building. I'd guess that she doesn't even know that she's using her abilities. Is that possible? Doxxing asked. Kelsier nodded. Trace minerals in the water can be burned. If just for a tiny bit of power, that's one of the reasons the Lord Ruler built his city here. Lots of metal in the ground. I'd say that... Kelsier trailed off, frowning slightly. Something was wrong. He glanced toward Cayman and his crew. They were still visible in the near distance, crossing the street and heading south. A figure appeared in the Canton building's doorway, lean with a confident air. He bore the tattoos of a high prelin of the Canton of Finance around his eyes. Probably the very man Kamen had met with shortly before. The obligator stepped out of the building, and a second man exited behind him. Beside Kelsier, doxxing suddenly grew stiff. The second man was tall, with a strong build. As he turned, Kelsier was able to see that a thick metal spike had been pounded tip first through each of the man's eyes. With shafts as wide as an eye socket, the nail-like spikes were long enough that their sharp points jutted out about an inch from the back of the man's clean-shaven skull. The flat spike ends shone like two silvery discs, sticking out of the sockets in the front where the eyes should have been. Oh, that's nice. A steel inquisitor. What's that doing here? Doxxing asked. Stay calm, Kelsier said, trying to force himself to do the same. The inquisitor looked toward them, spiked eyes regarding Kelsier before turning in the direction that Kamen and the girl had gone. Like all inquisitors, he wore intricate eye tattoos, mostly black, with one stark red line that marked him as a high-ranking member of the Canton of Inquisition. He's not here for us, Kelsier said. I'm not burning anything. He'll think that we're just ordinary noblemen. The girl, Doxxing said. Kelsier nodded. You say Kamen's been running this scam on the Ministry for a while. Well, the girl must have been detected by one of the obligators. They're trained to recognize when an allomancer tampers with their emotions. Doxxing frowned thoughtfully. Across the street, the Inquisitor conferred with the other obligator. Then the two of them turned to walk in the direction that Kamen had gone. There was no urgency to their pace. They must have been sent a tail to follow them, Doxxing said. This is the Ministry, Kelsier said. There will be 2 tails at least. Doxxing nodded. Kamen will lead them directly back to the safe house. Dozens of men will die. They're not at all the most admirable people, but they fight the final empire in their own way, Kelsier said. Besides, I'm not about to let a possible Mistborn slip away from us. I want to talk to that girl. Can you deal with those tales? I said I'd become boring, Kel, Doxxing said. Or Doxxing, dang it. Not sloppy. I can handle a couple of Ministry flunkies. Good, Kelsier said, reaching into his cloak pocket and pulling out a small vial. A collection of metal flakes floated in an alcohol solution within. Iron, steel, tin, pewter, copper, bronze, zinc, and brass. The 8 basic allomantic metals. Kelsier pulled off the stopper and downed the contents in a single swift gulp. He pocketed the now empty vial, wiping his mouth. I'll handle that, Inquisitor. Doxxing looked apprehensive. You're gonna try to take him? Kelsier shook his head. Too dangerous. I'll just divert him. Now get going. We don't want those tails finding the safe house. Doxxing nodded. Meet back at the 15th crossroad, he said, before taking off down the alley and disappearing around a corner. Kelsier gave his friend a count of 10 before reaching within himself and burning his metals. His body came awash with strength, clarity, and power. Kelsier smiled. Then, burning zinc, he reached out and yanked firmly on the Inquisitor's emotions. The creature froze in place, then spun, looking back toward the Canton building. Let's have a chase now, you and I, Kelsier thought. Pew. The end of chapter! End of chapter! What's up, Andrew? Okay. It's good so far. Okay. That was good. What are you reading? I was reading Mistborn. By Brandon Sanderson. Yes, we just finished the 2nd chapter. Alrighty. Let me get the next segment up. You guys are probably going to like it, or maybe not. I don't know. Mama, wow. Wow, 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 wow. Okay. I'm gonna restart TikTok real quick. I'll be right back. Okay. Whee! Whee! It's a good book so far. I like it. I was confused at first. But it's probably because I didn't realize it was sci-fi. And I was like, iron? What is he talking about? I was just being stupid.